fuller picture of the extraordinary scene in New York today, just breaking at this hour. It's been provided just now by another one of the survivors, a passenger named Joe Hart, who said simply of the last moments of flight, both engines cut out, and he, the pilot, actually floated it into the river. You might see him on your way in. You might exchange grunted goodbyes on the way out. And then again, you might wind up owing your life to his experience or her experience and his or her presence of mind. We close the countdown tonight with the story of the right pilot in the right place. A trained Air Force fighter pilot, former safety chairman of the Pilots Union, sometimes accident investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board. U.S. Flight 1549, New York to Charlotte. Chesley B. Sully Sullenberger III, your pilot. 150 passengers, 3 flight attendants, 2 pilots, all believed safe at this hour, though both engines were knocked out just after they left the ground, most likely by a flock of geese, though the only landing strip available amid the concrete canyons of Manhattan, the icy waters of the Hudson River, and ditching. The captain, Chesley B. Sully Sullenberger, 40 years of flying experience, 29 as a U.S. Airways pilot, 7 as an F-4 fighter pilot in the Air Force. The captain reportedly walked the plane twice after the evacuation. Following the amazing ditching, he was the last one in the aisles as the plane became partially submerged by the waters of the Hudson River. Let's bring in by phone former United Airlines pilot Denny Fitch, who along with the captain led the remarkable landing of United Flight 232 in Sioux City, Iowa in July of 1989 when an engine failed, causing the loss of all 3 of the hydraulic systems aboard that craft. A great pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be anywhere.
I would imagine everybody on that flight shares your feeling, and everyone on the flight today. Can you describe for us as best you can what the pilots would have likely experienced as the aircraft suffered the multiple bird strike that Captain Sullenberger described, and what they would have been immediately faced with?
Well, the first thing I think it needs to be noted is the weather conditions were favorable. That was on their side. They had VFR weather, as we call it, and that allowed them cloud cover above and visibility ahead. They probably would have seen the geese at the last minute. The next thing they would have heard is probably compressor stalls. I think one of your witnesses said he saw engine fire coming out, flames coming out of the left engine. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case on the right. Both of those engines would have instantaneously lost at least a substantial part of their power, and if not all of it. He attained an altitude of 3,000 feet, and I think considering the fact that he saw an airport in the distance, he quickly evaluated as he was getting the characteristics under control. He just wasn't going to make it across at the Teterboro, and wisely took the water landing. The conditions on a river are much better than you would want to ever take on the ocean.
What would he have had available to him after that bird strike? He would have had control but no ability to generate any further power?
Yeah, I think his power was probably, it sounds from what we know so far, that he had negative power. So what he was basically doing was trading airspeed, or altitude, that is, for airspeed. And that, my guess would be, in most jets, you can get about 200 knots. That's about 220 miles an hour. You can get a sink rate of about 1,000 to 1,100 feet a minute. And from what they told me crossing the bridge and landing on the river, it sounds like that's exactly what he did. He just maintained a good glide speed. Looks like he still had some of his takeoff flaps extended after takeoff. He never did retract those, so he had an additional lift from those because they were already out. And he just used the flight. Then when he got down to the water, he just nursed it kept getting it slower and slower and slower until it just was at minimum forward speed that he could afford to let it not touch. And by doing that, of course, he cut down the physical forces that he was going to encounter when he did touch the water.
Give me your assessment of this, the resume of this man. Captain Sullenberger's extra experienced safety chairman of the Pilots Association, participates in accident investigations. How might that background have impacted his decision-making at crunch time today?
Well, not only that, I think that's an added plus, but most pilots go to school every day. Every time something happens in aviation, that's a negative, or what we call hangar flying. You'll hear pilots say, well, boy, I was up there and this happened to me, and you take it and you put it in your file drawer because it didn't happen to you. You're getting tuition paid by somebody else to learn a lesson. And I think he got that in spades because when you investigate accidents, obviously you come to conclusions on what happened and what the pilot did right or did not do right. And so I think from that point of view, he had a bigger file drawer than perhaps most of us did.
Any way to assess how much of this? I mean, you mentioned the great weather conditions and the circumstances of the calm river as opposed to a turbulent ocean. Is there any way of looking at something like this and saying, breaking it up into percentages, what percentage was unbelievable skill and what percentage of it was unbelievable luck?
Well, I give motivational speeches, and I start out with every audience with a show of hands, 3 questions. How many of you believe in luck? How many of you believe in fate? How many of you believe in God or a higher being? And it's an interesting conclusion, but the bottom line of the whole thing is I just simply say we often look at the same circumstance, and depending on where you're coming from, you tend to put different labels on it.
All that matters is they're down. Denny Fitch.
Yeah, he did a fantastic job.
Whoever it was and whatever did it. The co-pilot of United 232 from Sioux City in 1989. Great thanks again for your time,
You
sir.
bet. God bless all.